It's Flames Nation Radio, an emergency edition. We do these. Shane and I said we would do emergency edition of the pod when there was something worth having an emergency edition of the pod about. And I think this qualifies. Before we jump into the guts of the Matthew Tkachuk trade to Florida, we're brought to you by DoorDash and by Eau Claire Distilleries, Rupert's Whiskey, the official whiskey of the Calgary Flames. And if you're a Flames fan tonight, after seeing the news, you're probably, drinking some kind of beverage, your beverage of choice, in commemoration of the end of the tenure of Matthew Tkachuk with the Calgary Flames and the beginning of a really interesting period of time. So I was at a barbecue. I was in the backyard of a friend's house, filling on my phone and drinking a delicious root beer, as people like to do on a warm summer's eve. And my phone dinged. I'm like, what's this? And the Flames made a trade. So here's the trade. And then the three of us, Shane, Mike Gould, and myself, will dive into the guts of it. So here's the trade. Matthew Tkachuk to the Florida Panthers with a conditional 4th round pick. We don't know what year. I think it's 2025, but we'll double check. And from the Panthers, the Flames get Jonathan Huberdeau. They get MacKenzie Weegar, and they get prospect Cole Schwindt and a conditional 2025 first-round pick. Now, just to go over this stuff very quickly, so Tkachuk was signed to an 8-year, $9.5 million extension with Florida. So he's signed in Florida in a tax-free state in a very, Sunrise, Florida is, of all the places to ply your trade, I can think of worse places to spend time than Sunrise, Florida. It's fairly nice. It's right next to the Everglades. You get to go speedboating or whatever rich people do in Florida, but it's a tax-free state. So hooray for Florida. Hooray for Matthew Tkachuk getting to go to the United States in one of the more favorable tax environments a human being could live in. The Flames get Jonathan Huberdeau. So last year, Edmonton Oilers center Connor McDavid, who we're contractually obligated to mention in passing in every podcast. Connor McDavid finished first in the NHL in scoring. Two people tied for second place at 115 points. One of them is Johnny Gaudreau, who the Flames lost in unrestricted free agency to Columbus, and the other one was Jonathan Huberdeau. And so the Flames get roughly a week after losing the second leading scorer tied in the league, they get the other one, which is kind of interesting. Huberdeau is he's at a $5.9 million cap hit for 22-23, at which point he'll become an unrestricted free agent. They also got right shot defenseman MacKenzie Weegar, who will probably be second/third pairing defenseman, depending on how you want to define it. He'll play behind Rasmus Andersson, who's arguably the most defensively gifted defenseman the Flames have, well, at least on that side. But Weegar is also a pending UFA. He's making $3.25 million against the cap. So he's a pending UFA. So the Flames have two guys that they might want to, they're probably going to start talking turkey with them for contracts fairly soon if they haven't already. Knowing Brad, they're probably well underway to getting something discussed. And then the futures in this move, Cole Schwindt played a little bit of the NHL last year, but mostly was with the Charlotte Checkers of the AHL. I believe he had 40 points in 70-something games. He's a center, left shot center. He's good. Is he great? No, but he's good. He's, I would argue, a solid B prospect. Coincidentally, we're just started our prospect rankings, and now we all have to redo a bunch of them and figure out where Cole Schwindt fits in.
I do.
And finally, the last piece of the puzzle, a conditional 2025 first-round pick. The condition, we're still trying to get clarity on what the conditions are on that pick and the 4th round pick. We were told that the Florida Panthers announced that the 2025 pick is, quote, top 10 protected. We assume that means that the pick maybe moved to another year, but maybe that's connected to the 4th rounder. We don't know. Well, to be honest, we're going to ask someone, but it's late everywhere, and so no one's going to really text us back and say, here's the parameters of a conditional pick, and it's the 5th most interesting thing in this trade. So we'll get into that later. But gentlemen, this is a lot of stuff. I mean, we heard over at National Hockey Now, Kevin Allen wrote the other week, I think yesterday, the day before, that the Flames asking price for Matthew Tkachuk was a good, like a premier forward, a good prospect, and a first. And if you look what the Flames got, I mean, they seem to have hit a lot of the things. If the three of us were sitting down with a whiteboard and Brad Living says, boys, how do we fix the Calgary Flames? This is a lot of the stuff that we would have sketched out. I'll go to Mike first because Shane and I talk all the time. Mike, what was your initial reaction, and what do you like the trade? What do you not like about it? What do you like about it? Let us know.
My initial reaction, I don't think it'll be a surprise to say that I was surprised. I was very, very surprised that it came out. Frank Saravalli tweeting it at 9:30 p.m., which
Friday.
Seems the Flames have a flair for dramatic in these sorts of cases. I mean, we saw Daryl Sutter get hired at 2 hours after they beat Ottawa 8-1 or something. They just come out with these crazy moves at the strangest times. So I've had a couple hours, or I guess an hour and a half now to digest this. Big thing for me, and I want to talk about this first. Everybody's going to say, talk about Huberdeau first. I'm going to talk about Weegar. Talk about MacKenzie Weegar. Pike said second pairing. No. Flames have their new number one defenseman. And this is something that I think I should have talked about this more earlier in the offseason, because this was something that I really strongly believed in.
In our internal Slack, friends, we all know Mike Gould is a big Phoenix or Arizona Coyotes guy. As soon as anything Coyotes happens, he's the first one. But anyone good at the Coyotes we hear about. And so he's been on the oh man, wouldn't it be cool if the Flames could get Jacob Chychrun train pretty much since, ever since Arizona, looked like they weren't going to be anything of note last season. He was on Chychrun.
And he wants out.
This feels like kind of a Chychrun-y move without the Chychrun-y price tag.
I mean, he's a little bit older, and I think he's better. I think MacKenzie Weegar is better. I mean, the thing, you get Chychrun if you're looking to build for the future. You get MacKenzie Weegar if you're looking to build for now. And one of my buddies texted me about an hour ago saying it feels like we just traded for 28-year-old Mark Jordanano, because that's what MacKenzie Weegar feels like in a lot of respects to me. This guy is a beast. I don't know how many expletives we're allowed to say on this podcast, but he kicks ass. That's what I would say about MacKenzie Weegar. He is fantastic. He is just he's a two-way, complete dominating presence at 5-on-5. And this is a Flames defense core that is, I liked a lot of the individual pieces, but I felt like guys were just slotted too high. And I feel like, you can get away with having one of Noah Hannafin and Rasmus Andersson on your top pair, but I don't like having both of them there. I like Chris Tanev, but, the diminishing returns, I'm worried about it. And now with MacKenzie Weegar, it's just oh boy, that is something that and especially considering this is a Brad Treliving move, this is a guy who really loves to make these splashes where he trades for these defensemen. And this is something that, maybe we should have expected that they would get a guy like Weegar, but oh boy, both Weegar and Huberdeau in the same trade. That is something that I didn't quite expect. I will say that lightly.
I'll just jump in. Look, so we've been at the site, we've sort of been pondering, what are the Flames without Tkachuk and Gaudreau, cap wise, goals above replacement wise, those kind of things, sort of in a micro and macro sense. So Evolving Hockey, last year they had Matthew Tkachuk as one of the more valuable players in the league from a goals above replacement perspective. He was worth 23.8 goals above replacement. That's a combination of his offensive, defensive, and penalty taking and drawing impacts. So 23.8, one of the better players in the league. So you take away 23.8 goals. That is, it's not insubstantial. So in this trade, the Flames traded those 23.8 goals to Florida for 14.8 from Jonathan Huberdeau and 9.7 from MacKenzie Weegar. Weegar has positive impact basically across the board. He takes slightly more penalties and draws slightly fewer penalties than a lot of players of his ilk. And that might be the only, if you want to, poke holes in his game, be like, and he's not great at everything. Yeah, I mean, his penalty impacts are probably a little bit lesser than they could be, but he's good at everything else. And, I think, Shane, you can jump in here in a second.
I'm not in a rush. I got a lot to say.
Here's the thing that sort of perplexes me. The Flames have a lot of defensemen now. And in terms of they have, I was thinking beforehand, I'm like, okay, Nikita Zadorov and Nick Milosh could be a perfectly acceptable third pairing. And I still think, in grand scheme of things, you would have done what you do with Zadorov and what you did with Branson last year. PK, defensive situations, bury him, and give your top two pairings the high ground. Weegar, they have a lot of different things they can do. You can do Hanifin and Weegar, and that'd be a banger of a pairing. And then your second pairing is what? Shillington and Anderson. That could be fun.
Put Shillington with Weegar.
Is it Zadoron and Anderson? You can basically pick. I don't know who the 7 is going to be right now, and to be honest, it doesn't really matter. The Flames have enough NHL level defensemen that I assume at some point they might look at moving some guys around. But we'll get into that in a sec. But just the idea of you have 3 good defensemen who can play in a lot of different situations, and I think a lot of the preseason for Daryl Sutter might be going like him and Ryan Husky are just giggling and pulling names out of hats and be like, okay, left side D is going to be pull a name Hanifin, and okay, Weegar. Okay, how about Hanifin and Tanev? We know that's good. Hanifin and Anderson. We know that's good. It gives you so many different looks for different situations, and I don't outside of you probably don't want to play Nikita Zadorov too high in the rotation, so he's probably by default the third best left shot defenseman. But beyond that, I mean, you could probably play the other guys in any way you want and have it work.
You could mix up the ice time on any given night. I think the way Sutter likes to use his D is a left shot with a right shot. He likes that. They now have 3 right shots: Anderson, Tanev, and Weegar, and 3 left shots in Hanifin, Zadorov, and Shillington. So I think any of those combinations can be mixed and matched, and you still get a quality pair. It doesn't matter which one. It doesn't matter who plays 24 minutes a night. You've got a quality player at every position. Someone has done it as well, no matter who's on the ice. It rounds out and makes it one of the most solid decors from top to bottom, and they're young. They're other than Tanev, everyone's on the other side of 30. So
yeah, no kidding. And I want to say this: Brad Treliving talks a lot about guys who don't have a lot of miles on them. That's something we hear a lot from him. Weegar's got 300 games under his belt. This is not a guy who's logged heavy miles at all. He's a bruiser. He's a beast. That's the thing about MacKenzie Weegar. Some of the people at Flames Nation might read some of my columns and say that I don't like big, tough players. But when they're as effective as MacKenzie Weegar, I mean, holy mackerel, this is a guy who's just going to punish you in so many ways. He
exemplifies what our friend Kent Wilson would call functional toughness, where he's tough, but he's so good. He's tough in the areas that you want your players to be tough. He's not tough I'll look tough and I'll take 10 minutes in penalties and be in the penalty box, playing with my phone for half a period. He's tough in that he just opens up space for everyone on the ice with him.
To have those kind of defensive numbers on a Florida team that prioritized goals over anything also is amazingly impressive. And the fact that when Ekblad went down, his numbers never took a hit either. You lose your partner and everyone thinks he's carrying you, and then you do just fine without him. That's another thing that he's proven to do. So he's checked more boxes than probably a lot of people, and he's set for a decent payday. But because he doesn't have the name recognition, it might not be as big as people think. When you don't have that draft pedigree and that name recognition and the huge point totals, they get you at an undervalue. So they have a year to try and get him locked up, and that's the thing. And if he doesn't, you can move him again. You're not tied into it.
The polling again from our friends at Evolving Hockey. A piece I wrote on the site for Friday morning was looking at sort of inputs goals for, goals against, and you lose Johnny Gaudreau. Potentially they were going to lose Matthew Tkachuk for what we didn't know what. So I would argue that Matthew Tkachuk for Jonathan Huberdeau is essentially a wash, and you're still out the offense that Johnny Gaudreau would have provided. I mean, you're not going to get those goals back. You'll try to replace him in the aggregate. You'll try to replace him with, you're going to have Mangiapane probably playing a bigger role. He'll probably get a PP1 usage. Maybe he's on the first line. Who knows? They have a lot of left wingers and guys who play their off wings. So they have some flexibility. But, you're not going to replace Johnny Gaudreau's offensive impacts. But Johnny Gaudreau did not play on the defensive side of things. He was not used in defensive situations. He wasn't a penalty killer. And if you look at the guys they have, I mean, Huberdeau is an adequate defensive player, but he won't be used in defensive situations. But if you look at the 6D that they have on Evolving Hockey, every single one of them has positive defensive impacts. Every single one. Nikita Zadorov is the worst defenseman on the team. And we don't mean it as a slight, we mean it as a compliment. He's the worst guy, and he was a positive defensive impacts player. He's a negative offensive impacts player, and he was at a negative penalty impact. But across the board, every single player on the Flames who looks like they're going to be a regular, top 6 player on the blue line has positive defensive impacts, which means if the thought process is, well, you lose, you're going to be looking at winning some closer games without Johnny Gaudreau. This is the type of player you'd want in order to play that situation. And you could argue with, a goaltender in Jacob Markstrom that was the runner-up for the Vezina last year, and 6 defensemen who can play in their own zone and play in their own zone fairly well. It seems like that could be a successful strategy. So I'm fascinated to see what they do.
One thing the Flames lost majorly was Johnny Gaudreau's transitional ability to get the puck from one end to the other. They lost. That's a massive impact that is not talked about because it's only tracked in like the hardest of analytical places, all3zones.com. But MacKenzie Weegar, you'd think a forward would need to be replaced, but MacKenzie Weegar is actually one of the top transitional defensemen in terms of controlled exits out of his own zone and entries into the offensive zone in the entire league. So, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I don't think anyone really saw this entire trade coming out of anywhere. And it literally
no way
out of left field is a great definition for it. Or the Ramel Tapia in the park home run tonight, like no one saw that coming too. So it's just unreal. I was vibrating for a bit there. I was actually I've been a diehard Flames fan since a kid. So like anytime there's a big trade, takes me back to like when Phaneuf was traded or any of those big trades getting Huselius, or as they say on the radio, Huselius. But
I'm going to say this: when there were reports coming out about the Flames getting those 3 or 4 players, that was the first trade that I thought of, was the Phaneuf trade.
Stajan, Jamairs, Hagman, and
they didn't get any Nick Hagmans in this deal.
No.
They didn't get any Nick Hagmans. I'm going to say this: Weegar, right-handed defenseman, he plays both sides. So that's some flexibility. That's something that Zadorov can do too. And he's the lefty. He can shoot. He can play on the right side. So you can flip-flop things around. You can maybe have a Weegar-Tanev pairing if you're really, really, really feeling spicy.
Or if you're up on goal with a minute left.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this. I think MacKenzie Weegar is what a lot of fans really, really, I think he is the ideal version of Eric Goodbranson in some ways.
We were talking about that.
I'm just
and he's $750,000 cheaper.
We were talking about that.
And that was the point I was just about to make. Goodbranson, signed for $4 million. Weegar signed for 3.2 or whatever. And I wasn't the hugest fan of Eric Goodbranson, but I can understand that type of player having value in certain situations if they have certain skills. And MacKenzie Weegar has all the skills that I would say a top pairing number 1 defenseman needs to have. And that's who I think he is. I think he is a number 1 defenseman. I think he is their replacement, their heir apparent to Mark Jordanano. That is how I feel about MacKenzie Weegar. I love Chris Tanev. I think Chris Tanev has done so much for this Flames team. He was a perfect bridge the gap after, they lost TJ Brody, and then, they had to go down without Jordanano for a year, and he was tremendous in the regular season on that pairing with Shillington. Chris Tanev does so much. He's not an offensive defenseman. He's never has been. It's never been his calling card. MacKenzie Weegar can do that. That is something that MacKenzie Weegar is really skilled at too. He can move the puck up the ice like any defenseman in this league can. Like maybe not like Cale Makar, but he can, like a lot of the top end defensemen can. So that's a extremely valuable thing that I think the Flames have gleaned out of this.
If the impact of this trade is that Chris Tanev becomes more of a third pairing guy, like if it turns out it's just Zadorov and Tanev on the third pairing, and Tanev is the first over the boards for penalty kill and things like that, and him and Zadorov are using the bump up shift, and then you sort of use other guys for other things. I think that's a huge win because, if the idea is, okay, like it's a 4-year deal for Chris Tanev seems a little bit risky at the time. And first 2 years, holy cow, I'll freely admit, I did not expect Chris Tanev to be as good as Chris Tanev has been. Is it reasonable to expect using this, leading on in the same way, that he'd be as effective for the next 2 years? I think he'd be playing with fire a bit, pardon the pun. And this addition gives you the ability, depending on what happens for next season, and by next season I mean 23-24, not 22-23, but yeah, it gives you the ability to ease his minutes, use him differently, and maybe get as much as if you're paying Chris Tanev $4.5 million, you want to squeeze as much hockey as you can out of Chris Tanev, the highest value minutes you can out of Chris Tanev, and I think this is going to be a move that really helps do that. Question for you guys. So I've seen some folks on Twitter, and to be blunt, some of our friends at Oilers Nation joking, well, yeah, but you got 2 pending UFAs and a prospect and a 2025 pick. The conditional UFAs, or the pending UFAs, can be seen, I think, as something that makes you nervous or something that excites you. I can see it both ways. Like Danny Austin, my friend Danny Austin, Post Media, posted, his initial thought of the trade was potentially, if the impact of this trade is that it essentially extends the Flames' contention window for a year. I mean, Brad Living has a year left in his current contract, at least right now. Who knows? He might get extended after pulling off this kind of thing. Daryl Sutter's contract is up after the 22-23 season. So, if you want to go all in and sort of, damn the torpedoes full speed ahead, this is the type of move you make in order to add some UFAs. But if the idea is you want to push, do what you can, but still maintain some flexibility in the future, they have Milan Lucic coming up as a UFA at the end of the 22-23 season, Sean Monahan, potentially Huberdeau, potentially, MacKenzie Weegar. You have about just shy of $21 million coming off the books. I think it's $20.775 million between those 4 players, and you can sell them. So
and not projecting for any potential cap increases if the escrow gets paid off.
It's not going to get paid off next year.
No, but still, it went up $1 million this year. But
it'll go up another $1 million for so yes, and then so you have just shy of $21 million coming off the books, and then another $1 million of a cap bump most likely. So if this works, great. If it doesn't work, I still think they did a nice job building themselves in some flexibility. I mean, as much as you don't want to say, if in a year, Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett are fist bumping each other and doing crazy things in the playoffs, and the Flames are golfing, it'll probably be kind of a sore thing for Flames fans. Just be like, yeah, you got Cole Schwint and some cap space in a 2025 first, but I can see the lack of long-term commitments for these guys, at least right now, is a possible bit of flexibility in them.
Here's what I'm going to say. I think the Flames absolutely need to get one of these guys locked up this summer. I would say one of them. I'm not sure which one. I understand the flexibility aspect of it, but I think both of these guys are tradable, even if you sign them. And I would say, MacKenzie Weegar under Daryl Sutter. I'm really interested in seeing how that plays out, and that's something that I would try to get ahead of. If you can sign him now, because I think this is the kind of player who you can bank on, potentially having a really good contract year. And if you wait to sign him in a year, you might be paying $1 to $2.5 million more a year than you might be doing right now. So I understand the flexibility aspect of it. I really do. I also understand, you gotta have some continuity here. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do with this team? I mean, I don't think you can afford. I don't think you can afford to go into this year again with the feeling that maybe 2 of your top players are 1 foot out the door. I don't think that is. And you need to get Mangiapane signed this summer anyway. So if you're going to sign him long term, why aren't you doing all you can to get the other 2 guys signed long term right now? And so I understand the
well, they just got him to, right? Like they probably weren't talking with him trades before, right? Like I would probably presume that the Tkachuk thing and the Tkachuk contract in place before he left was more in line with what they wanted. And now Brad's going to talk to him like he will. They'll get a sense of what's going on. And I really just doubt they'll ever let another UFA that highly walk right to free agency again.
Yeah, it's just so risky.
So
now, one other thing I just want to talk about is flexibility in terms of the defense. And you have the oldest guy on that defense is Chris Tanev. And I'm just going to say it. In a year, I think you might trade him. And if you have Hanifin, Anderson, Weegar, and Shillington as your top four, is Tanev redundant after a while? Because you can afford all five of them for a year. But if you're getting down to it with 1 year left on 33-year-old Chris Tanev, and you already have MacKenzie Weegar signed long-term, and you already have Rasmus Anderson signed long-term, do you need Chris Tanev, especially considering, we're talking about diminishing returns potentially in that final year? And maybe you can reallocate that asset with 1 season left and be proactive.
Can I interject with a question related to what Mike just said, guys?
Yep.
Of course.
What does this mean for Connor Mackey and Yusuf Valimaki?
I personally think one of them is going to have to go, and it's probably my personal opinion would be the one with the higher price tag that didn't get the call up to be on the bench in the playoffs, but that's just a personal opinion.
Yusuf was 3 months away from being waived anyway, so I'm really, I think Connor Mackey is the first call up, obviously, and you know what? They've been the healthiest team in the league over the last 2 seasons. I'd be willing to bet a lot that won't happen again this year.
I think both of them need waivers. I think one of them or Nick Milosh, I think those 3 guys are sort of contending for one spot on the blue line as a 7.
Yeah.
As a 7 guy. The top 6 is set. Yeah.
Is Connor Mackey at his age, is Nick Milosh at his age really going to be diminished too much by practicing with the NHL team and playing 20 games, 25 games? I think it's better than playing 0. I think it's better than playing the AHL. But also I think that for the Flames, I think that there's no one rooting more for Yusuf Valimaki to have a good camp than the Flames, because if Yusuf Valimaki has a good camp, it's a lot easier to find him a fresh start in a place where he can really excel.
Look at the Ulevy trade from Vancouver to Florida last year as kind of an example of a top prospect that wasn't making the team anymore, and they needed to do something. They instead of waiving him, a team took them on in a trade. Valimaki would be the same exact thing. They might not get proper what you'd expect value that they would have out of the draft pick if they'd traded that draft pick, but you still get something from them, and then something's better than nothing. So
Juho Lammikko had a good season with Vancouver, even though they didn't keep him. But I think Juuso, I think they move him. I can't see I don't think there's any way Juuso's on the Flames roster on game
but with the
day
cap
1.
Too. The cap savings.
It just doesn't make any sense. Juuso needs to go to a team that has 2 NHL caliber left-handed defensemen and be that third team, or be that third LD, and have a team that maybe isn't contending, that has an open spot. Be like, okay, you're our guy, you're our third guy. We're going to give you a run for 40 games, and if you aren't cut out for it, you're on waivers again. And that's pretty much what it is.
Honestly,
that was the mistake, not necessarily the mistake. Yeah.
I
was just going to say that was the mistake with Ulevy, but
he feels like a guy who maybe he's not in the NHL right away, but he feels like he has a great camp. Someone says, instead of, I think he gets waived and then he gets traded so that after he's waived, he can go up and down. And I think he goes somewhere. And if I'm his acquiring GM, I say, okay, you got a great camp. Our NHL roster is set. Go and kick some ass in the AHL. Be the man in the AHL, and we'll see you at Christmas.
It's sort of like Logan Brown, what we saw when he was waived and then he got to St. Louis. I will say this, though. I suspect Juuso will be a better NHLer than AHLer. I don't think he liked being in the AHL, and to be quite frank, I don't think I would either. It's not necessarily the most fun place to be in if you're a recently highly touted prospect. And I think if a team, I actually think it's funny, Arizona's only got 2 left-handed, Arizona's needs left-handed defense.
They have a lot of assets too.
Well, yeah, they can just take on a guy like that. Actually, you know what? Now that I'm thinking of it, Arizona actually has a lot of defensemen, but never mind.
Okay, you know who has a lot of defensemen? So let's talk about the not quite Wranglers. We suspect they'll be eventually named the Calgary Wranglers a nice nod to the original WHL Wranglers who, Mike Vernon, perennial Hockey Hall of Fame candidate, Mike Vernon, one of the retired number 30, Mike Vernon, came from the Flames, from the Calgary Wranglers. So Mike's been all over the copyright saga of the Wranglers. I feel bad for our friends at Calgary Sports and Entertainment, because the copyright office is nothing to trifle with. If someone's contesting your copyright, it could be downright nasty. So hopefully that gets resolved. But let's call them the Calgary placeholders for now. The Calgary placeholders will have a really good defensive group, or at least a defensive group with some promise. If we assume that the 6 NHL defensemen that we expect to be in the AHL will be Hanifin, Anderson, Tanev, Zadorov, Weegar, and Shillington. Let's say Connor Mackey is your 7, and Juuso Välimäki is somewhere else. Don't know where, somewhere else, let's say. So your American Hockey League team has a defense of Nick Milosh, Dennis Gilbert, Jan Kuznetsov, Ilya Solovyov, Jeremy Poirier, Nick DeSimone, and Colton Poolman. Ilya Solovyov, as Mike will attest to, he was a decent, if unspectacular, depth AHL defenseman. So was Colton Poolman. They were, Poolman played most of the season. Solovyov was sort of a 7 for most of the year, 6-7, depending on who was up and down from the NHL. So let's be honest, no slight meant to Mr. Solovyov, but if you have to sit him or Colton Poolman to play some of your higher touted prospects, or play some of these tweener guys like your Gilbert, your Milosh, or whoever, I don't think you really bat an eye at that too much. But I mean, that's like when you're going to have some veterans who can help Kuznetsov and Poirier transition in the NHL. I think Nick DeSimone will do some mentoring next year. Poolman, if he's in, will be probably a mentor for someone. Milosh, Gilbert, whoever. Like that's going to be a pretty interesting AHL blue line.
Well, I'm going to tell you this, Ryan. First of all, I think you're being very kind, giving all the listeners all the AHL defense content they want immediately after a blockbuster trade.
We haven't even talked about Huberdeau.
It's the number one topic of conversation. But I will say this: Brandon Weiss, my old friend down in Stockton, who just got hired by the San Jose Sharks, which is just fantastic.
It's a good ad for them.
More deserving. Yeah. But when I was talking to Brandon last year about the Heat, we would, he watched every game. He would say to me all the time, I was asking him why Poolman was playing over Johannes Schindval. And he was saying, well, Poolman's their best shutdown D right now. And I think there were a lot of people in that Stockton dressing room who really liked what Colton Poolman did on the back end as an AHL shutdown guy. So I don't think he's going to be a guy on the bubble down there. I think he might be a guy who is sort of their Zadorov in a sense.
Here's a thought. Who's very good at being a shutdown D in the NCAA and in the Q for decent chunks last year? He and Kuznetsov could be a pretty good pairing. I think that could be good. And then you have potentially, Jeremy Poirier playing with Nick DeSimone. And then, I think they have a lot of I think they're given, Joe Cirelli and the
Don
Knockbauer. Don Knockbauer.
And Mitch Love.
And Mitch, they're giving them they're going to have I think they're going to have the same kind of concerns on the AHL level as the NHL team does in terms of what about the goals. But the AHL team's going to have, some bangers on the blue line, and they're going to have the AHL's best goaltender returning for his sophomore year, along with Oscar Dansk backing him up. I think they could be equally as potent potentially as they were this year if they can find some goals.
Yeah. I'm going to let Shane jump in a sec, but what I'm going to say is that, and I feel like I've said what I'm going to say is 12 times in this episode already, but I think DeSimone and Poirier have very similar player profiles. Having them on the same pairing at 5-on-5, I think I would love to see them both anchoring a power play in it, but I think honestly, you could have Kuznetsov and Poolman split up with one of those two other guys each. I think a pairing with Poolman and Poirier could be really interesting. Jeremy Poirier, that is, I think I've bemoaned a little bit, the Flames' lack of defensive depth in the NHL and the AHL. Organizationally, I was going to write an article on it. I never got around to it, but
it's in the queue still. Then and is there sort of language there?
Yeah, but Jeremy Poirier is sort of the exception. He's my favorite Flames defense prospect, and this is a guy, folks. Oliver Shillington, the trajectory he took. This is something where Jeremy Poirier, if you're heading down to the Dome, seeing any of those Calgary TBA AHL games this year, Jeremy Poirier is the guy who, if you're wanting goals from the D, that's the name to circle on the score sheet, because he's going to be really active.
I think probably their goal is by the end of that season, maybe you reunite Poirier and Kuznetsov for the playoffs. But the idea is,
wouldn't that be crazy?
You want to get them to be a point where they're fully fledged AHL defensemen. You feel comfortable putting them together. Shane, jump in, man.
I would not be surprised if Jeremy Poirier, even like 2 or 3 months into the season, was running their first power play unit. That's what I'm.
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if he started the season running their first power play unit. He is a gifted offensive player. He's super offensive, needs to work on his defense, but that's a good transition, because like nobody has really good defense prospects like Calgary does. They've got really good shutdown guys. They've got guys that have NHL experience as well, and are fringe guys that can call up anytime. Milosh is no slouch. In the AHL, Milosh is a top pair guy. At the NHL level, he's a fill-in guy. Mackey's ready to go. Mackey requires waivers. I really see him on the team, but
no chance.
And the other thing,
zero chance.
And the other thing is, you need more than 14 defensemen in a season anyways due to injuries. So I think every one of these guys gets 50-some games at least, and there's going to be all sorts of combinations. Some of them will go up like Mac, or some of them will go up NHL, but I think at least like they all get significant amount of games in the AHL. It's a good decor no matter what. If one guy's gone, they've got a perfect guy to fill in. And their forward group is just as scary with Ben Jones signing was sneaky great for the AHL as well. I love Ben Jones. Schwint, both of those guys had NHL experience last year, just cups of coffee, 2 games each. They got deeper everywhere, and you don't know what's going to happen at camp. You don't know what a guy like Pelche is going to do at camp. If the coach likes it, here's the thing. If the coach likes him, he'll stay. That's how that'll work. If Daryl likes you and Daryl's got a role for you, you'll get to play there. That's how that'll work. So by no means do we know if Calgary's even done. Like we said, we've got to sign Madge and Shillington, but they still got cap space for the season, even if we project. Pike did some projections before he came on, if you want to talk about him, Pike.
Yeah, we basically, if you look at the guys who are locked in, the 11 forwards, including Mangiapane, we project Mangiapane at around $5 million, and the 60, including Shillington, we project Shillington at about $275. So with all those guys, you have the Flames sitting pretty with about $5 million and change. I think 5.6, 5.7, somewhere in that range, depending on how those two contracts come out. I think I'm at 5.725 mil. And you need to, granted, you need to use that money for your 7th defenseman, your 12th forward, your 13th forward, and your 14th forward, maybe, if you want to have them. So, at league min, you can spend, you still have the ability to throw some money, add like a $3 million forward
$3 million somewhere. Paul Stastny or something like that.
Yeah. Actually, I was gonna close out for you gentlemen. So what comes next? Because, the Flames have been, it's been an eventful offseason. We had the draft where we expected something to happen with someone, and then they just made 3 picks, which good. They needed the picks. Wish they'd done more, but the picks they had, they made them. And then, Johnny Gaudreau's not a Flame anymore. And then we had the Tkachuk saga. And now the Tkachuk saga has turned into, I'm fairly impressed, admittedly, with how well the Flames dealt with that. And so with the roster they have, with the holes that we perceive them still to have, or maybe just some perceived weaknesses in terms of who's going to score goals with this team, what do you think's next? Because for me, I'm like, okay, maybe they, take, one of those defensemen they have, one of their depth guys, and maybe flip that for some AHL forward help, or maybe they just try to free up some cap space and upgrade a forward position. There's still some decently good to damn good forwards available in free agency if they want to go that way. And so what do we think they do between, and they still have 3 ARB cases to settle. So it's not they have 5 UFAs left to settle, 2 guys with no ARB, in Pospisil and Rosicka, 3 guys left with Arb and Phillips, Shillington, and Mangiapane. So what's next, and what are we expecting to see here?
Mike, I want to talk about Huberdeau a little bit before we just talk about the future, because we haven't. It's hilarious. Yeah. We literally skimped him right to Uyghur, and then he's the 115 point piece coming back.
We're going to talk about somebody that a decent chunk of the PHWA had in their heart ballots. Pish posh. We don't need to talk about heart contenders here. We're talking about MacKenzie Weegar only.
But Mike, do you want to talk about Huberdeau for a bit first, just because we're 40 minutes in?
Yeah, I want to talk about Huberdeau. Absolutely. First things first. I don't think Michael Backlund's given up his number to him. No. So he's got to pick a new one. I would love to see him take number 13, to be honest. I think that'd be hilarious.
Do you think he'd take 10?
He could take anything with a 1 in the end either too, right?
Give me 71. 71. How about 71? That'd be nice. But here's what I'm going to say. Jonathan Huberdeau is one hell of a player. I mean, holy mackerel. I mean, we're talking about this guy as though, he's maybe the second piece in this deal. No way. This guy's an 115 point left winger who is just, this guy made Sam Bennett into a 28 goal scorer. And we're talking about him. Yeah, where he's going to be playing with Elias Lindholm, Andrew Mangiapane. Maybe to put Blake Coleman on that line. That would be kind of cool. Put even more defensive responsibility on that line. I'm really interested to see Jonathan Huberdeau under Daryl Sutter. But again, it's all about the contract. It's all about getting this guy locked up. And I've said it on Twitter already a couple times tonight. You do it. 8 years. I want that contract. I really do. I think that is so important. I would do it with Johnny. Jonathan Huberdeau is the same age. And that's a player who is worth locking down.
A lot of questions. A lot of people have questions about his defensive game, but if there's a team out there with more top end defensive forwards than the Flames, please tell me by committee. They've got Lindholm and Backlund, who have been Selke candidates in their own right, both multiple seasons.
Lindholm is second in voting this year.
Yeah. And Backlund's been, if you're a big analytics guy, you understand how important Backlund is defensively as well. Blake Coleman, for the large chunk of the season, was operating at in terms of relative to the league, like a 99% defensive impact. And Mangiapane is not a slouch. Him and Toffoli aren't a slouch in their own right. They have tons of guys that know how to play protective defensive hockey with a D-core that also knows the job. Their job isn't to rush up the ice and get goals. Their job is to defend their own end and transition the puck properly. So I think Huberdeau fits better, and they needed a guy that has that unrelenting all-out attack mentality, and that's Huberdeau, and he can pass the puck as good as anybody in the history of the NHL.
Well, okay.
No. He's great. He can find seams. He's got speed, which they haven't had in a long time. They lost that with Johnny, and they needed it back. He's got more size than the passer, and he's going to hopefully change their power play by being able to find some different seams. Teams have kind of got used to what the Johnny Gaudreau was doing in here, and now it's a different look with a different elite player, and it's unreal. And like Mike said, if you can get him signed for 8 years, you do it. That's a player that's going to hold value for a long time. Even if he goes down to 85 points a year, people are still going to pay a premium dollar for him if you're ever do decide to shift in another direction. So unreal. I think they have the pieces to counteract his defensive inefficiencies by committee. And I think that's what makes him an even better fit for Calgary than it seems outright when you just look at his numbers isolated.
I just want to throw something totally crazy out here. And maybe it wouldn't have been crazy 3 years ago. Sean Monahan, slot, power play again. Jonathan Huberdeau setting him up. Is he healthy? Let's see it. I'm going to say it, that with Sean Monahan in the slot on the PP, that connection really works. I'm just gonna throw it, because you just lost 2 forwards on your power play in Gaudreau and Tkachuk. You need a guy to play the front of the net. Tkachuk's been doing that for years.
Mange can do that.
Mangiapane can do it. Mm-hmm. You got Huberdeau, Mangiapane, Lindholm. Who's your fourth guy?
You said it.
Just a question. It's just a question. You could put Tyler Toffoli there. I'm sure he'd be more than capable. You can have Michael Backlund and Blake Coleman on your second unit. A couple other options there, but I really wonder, guys. Okay. I really wonder.
Just
you got 1 year, but yeah.
I'll play Debbie Downer here, because if we don't want to get too happy here on the podcast. Okay, Does your opinion this crystal ball time? If we're sitting here on June 20th, if we're at the draft next year in Nashville and the Flames are talking about not having Weegar or not having Huberdeau or contract, one or both, does that change your opinion of this trade that much?
Yep, a little bit.
Probably. Yeah.
Enough that it registers as significant, but even the first and Schwint is okay. Like they were in a very, very tight position with what Tkachuk did to them. So, but
it's not the sort of thing that you can say was unforeseen. Like when they pulled off this trade, it was the thing where everybody knew both these players are UFAs and you got to get talking right away. So if they can't get that done, I mean, that's just an indictment. That's just another couple players that they haven't been able to sign.
I'll say this. Granted, the situation was different because Jerome McGinley was in his 30s and he had a full no move. But I'm saying this, and all due respect to the players they got from the Pittsburgh Penguins, but at least we had friggin' heard of the players that the Flames got in this trade. Ken Agostino has had a very good career as an AHLer. He's currently playing in, I believe he's with Novgorod in the KHL right now. Ben Hanowski is no longer playing professional hockey. He hasn't played professional hockey in a while. He spent most of his pro career in Germany. The first round pick the Flames got was a late first, and it turned into Morgan Klimchuk, and then it turned into Andrew Nielsen. And then it turned into Andrew Nielsen walked as UFA. So effectively, like I understand if you're a Flames fan, you're going, didn't they just basically punt the risk from Tkachuk a year? And kind of. I'll say they've gotten some opportunities to keep some good players past 1 year. And then they've gotten Cole Schwint, who they have under control for a while, at a 2025 draft pick. So, I mean, the worst case scenario is the Flames have basically just shifted their headaches from right now to next summer, which, I mean,
they have more cap space next summer. It makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
like the two big deals come off the books. So the one guy playing on your fourth line making $5 million is not going to be making $5 million on the fourth line. Like that alone is a massive hold for you.
The first and Schwint are the nice to haves. You need to have one of those two players at the very least here long term to make this a viable trade. I would prefer to have both.
Brian Burke always said to judge trades.
And I will say, going back to what Pike was saying earlier about what's next.
Oh,
well, yeah.
You had.
Yeah, go ahead, Pike. Go ahead.
Well, like Brian Burke, current Pittsburgh Poho, former Calgary Poho. He always said you judge trades with calendars, not with stopwatches. And so, I mean, we will judge this basically based on where we're, how things look in 11 months from now. But I mean, I think right now, as a calculated gamble, I think you give it if we're throwing out letter grades, I give this a solid B minus. I think they made the team better in ways that they needed to. They're worse because they lose the Tkachuk of it all. And I still think, they're obviously, a markedly worse defensive team than they were to begin the summer. But I mean, in terms of plugging holes, if the idea is you're saying, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, and you're trying to plug holes in the boat and you're trying to go full speed ahead, this is a reasonably good way of plugging holes. So we'll see how it turns out. And now what's next?
Well, they could fill a 3C hole. They could do that, and they have the money to do it on a 1-year deal for someone. That's what I would do. Yeah. I would go out and get center depth. You've got the D depth now. You've got the winger depth. You've got a bunch of rookies that are ready to be call ups at times. So go get the veteran center. Get a good solid 1-2-3 punch. Leave yourself about $1 or $2 million in cap space if you can, and let that accrue as the season goes on.
I'll say this: how much would Evan Rodriguez cost?
Yeah, I like that.
Just throwing a name out there because he's good. He's one of those guys you could throw him around second unit power play, third line, second unit PK, first unit PK. He could do whatever, but I mean, he'll have options too. But I don't know if the Flames haven't suddenly become an option for him.
Yeah, or a Paul Stastny type. But what I'll say, God, I keep saying that. I got to stop saying that. God, they're never going to go get Phil Kessel, are they? Oh,
no,
he'd just be
they're not gonna go get Phil Kessel.
He'd be so perfect as the fourth
I
guy
know
in that
you
top
love him,
power
but
play.
that's not gonna happen.
God, he's just so good.
He's gonna still want some cash, I presume.
Well, yeah, I mean, you maybe like 2-3 million. I mean, he's held out this long. I mean, we're 10 days into free agency now. You know, I don't know how much the guy's gonna get. I mean, you look at what a guy like Thomas Vanek got. He was sort of similar. When he had to wait for the Canucks, he got 1 year, 2 million.
Yeah,
you can get.
Sense. I'm interested. Brad always does something that we don't expect.
Get me Phil Kessel. Just get me Phil Kessel.
They need some right shots.
Brad is a Brian Burke disciple, and Brian Burke's one of his biggest trades with the Toronto Maple Leafs is a trade for Phil Kessel.
Oh yeah, that's gonna rub that into Leafs fans. They're saying Hamilton and they didn't their second round pick.
You know what? They traded for Phil Kessel, and Phil Kessel is a borderline hockey Hall of Fame player.
A 2-time Stanley Cup champion, Phil the Thrill Kessel. That's how I refer to him. Well, put the respect on the guy's name. He's not many guys have their name on that thing twice.
I wear number 81 in beer league for Phil Kessel.
Good for you.
I picked that number.
Good for you.
Yeah. Anyway,
but
yeah, I think beer league shine might be a good way to close this sucker off. Unless you have one last thing to chime in with, Shane.
I was just gonna say they got the free agent destination got significantly more appealing today with how their roster outlook now looks.
Oh, way more.
So now if anyone is truly, especially a veteran, truly looking for a real good shot to try and get their name on the Stanley Cup, Calgary is a place that has a hole, and you might take a discount to sign there as well. So look out for something like that. That could be possible. But something's going to happen still, and I still expect at least 1 or 2 more trades from Calgary this offseason. I feel like Brad's not done, and he's just starting. He got the big business out of the way, and now it's time to play.
He's a tinkerer. He'll be tinkering until
you need to use a grocery store analogy here. I don't know what to do right in the moment though.
Well, it's late. We'll come up with one better.
What was?
I think
Brad's.
I think we'll cap it off there, gentlemen. Yeah. It's late. Our East Coast
they're going to talk tomorrow.
Team deep in your bed, and we'll have more updates on the site on Saturday as we hear from the new member of the Calgary Flames and from Bradshaw Living at various points. We haven't had this. We don't have a schedule yet for that. So thanks for joining us for this emergency edition of the podcast with Mike, our special guest, for DoorDash, for Eau Claire Distillery, for Shane, for Mike, for Ryan. I'm Ryan. Thanks for joining us. And hopefully there'll be enough newsworthy things to happen that we might do more of these during the offseason. But otherwise, Shane and I will see you at the same bat time as usual on Thursday with a regular edition. For now, we bid you adieu.